the political divisions seem to be happening within those who've typically been on the side of cultural socialism. So, looking at Subsakistan, of which I am part of, I've noticed a few proponents of DEI writing articles following what we've seen at the Ivy League universities, Claudine Gay, and the testimony in front of Congress, and people going, maybe DEI has this ideological baggage, which is having these negative effects on people. And so they're basically asking the question, DEI ought to be reformed, or should they say they're proposing that DEI needs to be reformed because it's picked up some bad traits. I suppose listening to you is actually DEI is founded on priors that are contra to things like cultural liberalism. So I guess my question to you, Eric, is can DEI be reformed? Because Roger Scruton, someone who did a similar tracking as you, University of Birkbeck to University of Buckingham, he wrote, I can't remember in which book, he said, the thing is, ideological spasms, they always happen and they affect everything. But they always recede. Unfortunately, they leave bureaucratic slime behind them. That's okay. the paraphrasing. Can DEI be reformed? What does it look like? Or is it the Christopher Rufo, the only way that you could ever possibly get rid of these things is by getting rid of them?
Boy. In theory, it's a bit like a mixed capitalist economy. You can have a bit of redistribution, a bit of egalitarianism there, and that may even be a good thing if you're spreading, decent education to people who can't afford it. That may be good even for wealth creation. So I wouldn't say no to any egalitarianism. However, the problem is, how do you restrain this thing when the entire moral order of our society revolves around these taboos, which are unbounded? And part of the problem is modern liberalism. It has bounds on economics. So it's not, it's suspicious of communism. It's not going to go full communist. It recognizes that communism is a problem and you need property rights and so on. On the cultural side, it doesn't recognize any real limits to egalitarianism and hypersensitivity. And because of the lack of any bounds on modern liberalism, I think DEI is always going to be a problem. Now, in theory, we could have a countervailing force. So if somebody said, in order to be inclusive, we have to have these speech codes. And somebody else was able to say, well, in our society, actually, freedom of speech and academic freedom is a higher value than sensitivity. And that is made clear in law and in bureaucratic guidance. Then actually, okay, you can do your DEI as long as it is totally respecting freedom of speech. So if you think there's some demographic that isn't being reached properly, you can try to broaden the pipeline. That's great, no problem. Or you can have interviews that are blind or CVs that are blind, no problem. That's a way of trying to expand the pool, maybe get a bit more representation for underrepresented groups. Now, what I would say is, the kind of groups that the DEI bureaucrats and the ideologues are interested in, again, are the woke, the sacred woke groups, race, gender, sexuality. There's no interest, for example, in underrepresented, let's say, white working class, underrepresented conservatives. That would be of no interest. So there is not actually a genuine interest in diversity and equity in a way. There's an interest in the politicized categories that matter to progressives. But what I would say is that if you had sufficient counterweights, then you could, in theory, have a DEI regime that was content neutral between left and right, between various different groups, and in theory did not infringe upon truth-seeking and academic freedom. But that's very hypothetical and theoretical. So one of the ideas I've had is to have something that I would call equivalent action, which is, anything you're going to do on race and gender, you have to match on politics and ideology. So if you want to monitor people's race, you can monitor their voting and their ideology. If you want to try and get better representation for race or gender, you can do exactly the same for politics. So you'd have, there aren't enough conservatives in academia. Well, we're going to have to rebalance that. And I'd say fine. I mean, that means that you're actually taking seriously a range of different characteristics, not just your favored sacralized characteristics. Now, do I think that's ever going to happen in a million years? No. Universities, if you just look at the affirmative action decision in the US, they will do anything in their power to evade, anything in their power to maintain their focus on the sacred totems. And so, therefore, I have to reluctantly say that at this point, probably abolishing DEI is probably the only practical solution for actually getting back to those kind of classical liberal values and getting away from where we've been, without ruling out the possibility that we can go to this equivalent action scenario where, I mean, the way I would put it is, if you don't want to do DEI for conservatives in your university, then you don't have to, but then you can't do the race and gender stuff. So you do whatever you want, and I would leave it up to them. But I think they'll dial it back to zero if that's the choice they're given.
We mentioned the congressional hearings with the Ivy League presidents and CEOs in the wake of October 7th earlier, and brief recap of that is ultimately most of them ended up falling on their swords in some way or another. The press of all sides jumped on them for what they saw as inadequate responses to how they were dealing with rising incidents of anti-Semitism and physical threats being made to Jewish students on campus. And it had lots of people in the commentariat asking the question, is this the beginning of the end? Because it's shown an ugly face. And people have said, well, perhaps we've reached an inflection point now, and it's on its way out. What do you think? Do you think cultural socialism is and DEI and all of that worldview is here to stay? Do you expect there to be a rollback?
I don't expect much of a rollback, actually. So I would say the peak woke hypothesis, yes, it's true. We have reached peak woke, and I think we've drifted down on a number of different indicators. The Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression has a sort of index of professors that are targeted for firing, and it has an index of no platforming. Now, the no platforming stuff is back up high and around this question of Israel-Palestine, but I think the firing numbers have gone down, and I think in terms of the media's fixation on things like white privilege and white supremacy has also gone down. We'll see what happens once Trump is running and looks likely to get the presidency again. But at least for now, there seems to have been a peak of just, the sort of racial reckoning, George Floyd period. 2020, 21 was kind of the peak. It then came down. 2022, 2023. Now, where it's going to go next, I don't know. But what I would say is this. You might have older senior New York Times liberals who still have power over the New York Times, moderating and saying, actually, you know what, we need to have an editorial against cancel culture. We need to sort of allow people to express support for the Cass review and criticism of EDI and gender ideology. So I would say those sort of senior established left liberals have rode back a little bit and, cut back on DEI in the major corporations. All of that's true and it's happened, and there's a big but. The reason that I am not optimistic is there's a huge age skew in all this data, that the Zoomers and millennials are twice as intolerant, especially if we take left-wing Zoomers and millennials and we compare them to left-wing boomers. They're twice as intolerant on speech. And that's a trend which you can track back in the data. It's not because of age. So an 18-year-old in 2000 was just a lot more pro-free speech than an 18-year-old in 2016. It's not about their age. And what I think is going to happen is as they become the median voter, the median CEO, they are going to change our culture in a very dramatic way. So yes, there is a small victory that has been won, and there's criticism from Fareed Zakaria of CNN, about DEI. There's all this stuff that's occurring at the elite level in the mainstream institutions, but that's the top layer of senior people, and it's the young staffers and their beliefs that I'm really worried about.
Well, yeah, the big question then is, will it filter down? Will those people even look to those senior elites as worthwhile role models? Will they change their views? I don't know what to take from all this, Eric, other than hope I'm retired by the time they're running the institutions that I'm in, because I'm not too sure things are looking too favourable for me at the moment. Maybe we all just need to find a little readout like you have over at the University of Buckingham,